Well, good morning, church. It's great to be together again. I mean, it's not super great to do it this way, but we are doing our best in these days to find ways to connect virtually as we anticipate the time when we're going to be able to be together again. What we want to do today is we want to start a conversation about mental health. We understand that there's a lot of pressure in these days. There's a lot of things that are going on. There's been a lot of disruption. And so we just know that there's just stuff that's rolling around in our heart and our soul and our mind. And so we wanted to start a conversation about that. A few weeks ago, our kids director, Melissa Simpson, had a Zoom call with several kids in our church, and she read this awesome story called You Are Special. And it's this story that really outlines the human need for belonging, the human need for acceptance, the human need for love. And at the very end of the story, Melissa asked the kids this question, like what makes you special? Like, what makes you unique? What makes you stand out? What makes you valuable and worthy of love and belonging? And it was just so amazing to just listen. I was in the other room, and so I was able to listen to my boys answer that question, and I was able to listen a little bit to what some of the other kids were saying. And it was in that moment that I just had this thought that, like, how would a bunch of adults answer that question? Like, it's one thing for kids, it's an important question for kids to answer, but man, it's an important thing for everybody to answer, because there are just things that have happened to us in life that have robbed us of the confidence that it takes to know deep within your bones that you are special, that you do belong, that you do have a voice, that you are worthy of love and belonging and connection. And I just have a hunch that if we just got a bunch of adults in a room around a dining room table and we just asked a question like, hey, what makes you special? My hunch is that a lot of adults would struggle to answer that question, partly because of our experience, partly because we've not always been treated as though we are special, although we are worthy of belonging. And I think it's in that moment that we understand that in some way mental health has touched all of us. Like, we all know someone who struggles with feelings of depression or anxiety, or hopelessness, self-harm. For many of us, it's part of our story. It's part of what we have struggled through. It's part of our journey. And it's just time for the church to stop neglecting mental health. It's been too long since we have had serious reflection on this issue in our life, in our church. And so we want to be a group of people that understand that Jesus has come to heal and restore and redeem the whole person. And there's just some ways that the church has responded to mental health in the past that have not been helpful. And so if you're watching this today and that's been your experience, that you've been connected to a church or some followers of Jesus and you have just not been cared for well, I just want to say that I'm sorry about that. I don't believe that lives up to the words and the message of Jesus, the kingdom that he wants to bring. I believe that the word that he would speak over your life on this day is grace. The word that he would speak over your life today is healing and compassion. And so we just want to, for a few minutes, kind of unpack some of the responses of the church. One of the ways that the church has responded is simplification. So we've just wanted to simplify the issue, the struggle, the journey of mental health. And so, like, if you would just pray more, if you would just read more scripture, if you would just surround yourself with positive people, if you would just think positively, like, don't think about what you don't have, think about like what you do have. And we've just simplified mental health to a set of 3 steps, like it's like a cookie recipe or something like that. And it's just more complicated than that. And so we've tried to simplify. We said, well, if you would, just understand, like Philippians chapter 4, like you can do all things through Christ. And we've just simplified it to such an extent that it just feels like the church isn't actually listening. We're not actually hearing the concerns of the people around us. So we've simplified, and we've also deflected. We've also said like, oh no, that doesn't really like happen here. There's not really space in the church for issues of mental health. And what it makes me think about is this story in the scriptures that Jesus tells about this man who has been beaten and he's left on the side of the road for dead. And there's 3 other men that encounter him kind of one by one. And 2 of the men completely ignore his suffering. They see the fact that he needs help, that he's not doing well, that he needs someone to step into his story, but they kind of walk around him. They kind of take the long way around him instead of stopping to help him. Then there's this other man that everybody's expecting is going to do the same thing that the other men did and not help, but he stops and he leans in and he gets curious about what has happened in this man's life, and he brings help and healing and restoration in this man's life. And I just think that's a screaming example of the church, that we cannot simply turn a blind eye to things that are difficult, the things that are hard, the things that we don't understand. Like, we're called by God, we're empowered by the Holy Spirit to lean in to situations where there is suffering, where there is brokenness, where there is pain. And we don't have to understand it to be helpful, but we do have to have a heart of compassion and a desire to understand what's unfolding, and then to offer ourselves, to offer friendship, just as Jesus did. That's what he came to offer. He came to the world to offer himself. And I think we can follow him in that way in other people's lives. And so we simplify, we deflect. Another posture, another response of the church is silence. And I sometimes worry that the loudest message of the church is that of silence. That the church, instead of it being known for its proclamation, for its message, that there is a God in heaven who has come to seek and to save and to restore and to heal and to bind up and to proclaim a new day for everybody who has ever lived, to speak resurrection over dead things. Instead of the church being known for that, I think too often the church is known for the things that it won't talk about, for the things that it won't bring to the surface. And we just need to be done with that way of living, that way of existing as the Church of Jesus Christ. I think it's important for everybody to hear today that mental health concerns are just part of our brokenness. It's part of our humanity. It's part of our story. And so instead of using shame to talk about mental health, I think what we want to do is we just want to say, hey, like, this is something that the Lord desires to bring healing in your life. This is something that the Lord wants to heal and redeem and restore within you, but it touches all of us. And so instead of it touches like a few unique people or a few unique situations, like, this is just part of what it means to be human. We've all been told things in our lives that have brought trauma, that have brought pain, that have brought abandonment in our life. Like, that's happened to all of us. And it's going to take all of us, I believe, as followers of Jesus, to kind of change the way that we talk about this. I think it's going to take courage to talk about depression and anxiety and self-harm and helplessness and hopelessness and all of these things. It's going to take courage to do so, but I just think that's why we are here. And so if there's one place where we should be talking about it, it would be in the church. And so that's really our hope for today. We know that in one day, in one conversation, in one video on the internet, we're not going to be able to change history, but what we can do is we can change how we move forward today. And so we have several mental health professionals in our church who are going to be sharing a little bit today, a part of their perspective, part of what they see during these COVID-19 days, and what their experience has been, and what the church needs to know, and then what you may need to know if you find yourself struggling with issues of mental health. And so thanks for joining us, for being a part of this conversation. I'm grateful for these mental health professionals that are going to share with you now. I hope that you find it helpful. I hope that you're encouraged. I also hope that you are convicted a little bit to pay attention a little bit more to the people around you. I think that's why you're here, and that's what God has called you to live into. So I pray that these series of conversations today would be a help to you.
Hello, Invitation Church. My name is Wanda Jeffcoat, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor at Wellspring Therapy Center in Sioux Falls. I work with people of all ages in the areas of anxiety, depression, suicidal tendencies, and trauma recovery.
Hey church, my name is Michaela Campbell and I am a licensed professional counselor of mental health. I work at a practice called Heartland Psychological Services that's based in Yankton and Vermillion, South Dakota. And because we're a rural practice, I have a very general practice, which means I serve individuals and couples and families. I also work with a lot of kids, primarily with anxiety, depression, attention and focus concerns, but also trauma. My background is working with survivors of abuse and neglect, and so that's an area of specialty for me. Additionally, I'm in the process of training to get my certification as a sex therapist, so that's a growing area of interest and specialty for me.
Hello, my name is Rachel Haas. Currently, I am pursuing my master's degree for clinical mental health counseling, and in this program, I get the opportunity to be an intern at a nonprofit organization here in town. On the other side of my life, I also work at a hospital here in town in the behavioral health aspect of things.
Hi, my name is Eric Anderson and I work for Sioux Falls Psychological. Some of the things that I work with primarily are trauma, PTSD, and abuse.
Hi, my name is Carmen Marchand. I'm a school counselor in the Sioux Falls School District. I primarily work with K through 5 students. I've been a school counselor about 8 years. I have high interests in the area of self-regulation, especially with students and staff at the school building.
Hi church, my name is Courtney Ballard and I'm a clinical therapist in the area. I work with adolescents and their families.
My name is Ashley Sarah and I work at Southeastern Behavioral Healthcare. I have worked there for nearly 5 years and I do a variety of different things such as case management, therapy, and I facilitate a few different groups. I'm currently going to school for addiction studies. I've also completed a master's program in family sciences. My passion lies with that co-occurring area of the field, so people who struggle with addiction and with mental health issues.
Hey Invitation, my name's Jenna Qualley, and I am a mental health counselor as well as a registered yoga instructor. At this point in time, I would say more of my emphasis has been on working with mental health providers and providing yoga as an additional form of treatment for mental health, particularly adults who have experienced trauma and those who are dealing with grief and loss. So first of all, I want to thank Dave for bringing us all together to have these conversations about mental health concerns. Right now, I know that mental health concerns right now during this time are really across the board, across the spectrum. You know, everything from symptoms of depression and anxiety, maybe people who are experiencing this for the very first time, or people who are constantly managing those symptoms have now experienced an exacerbation of it.
And so just some common things that I have witnessed just in both of those capacities, and even within the personal relationships of my life, that there's just a lot of anxious emotions that have been uprising in a lot of people and just even becoming more forefront just through the experience of COVID and all the uncertainty that is happening and how often things are changing and new information is coming out, and how that information and the reality of where we're at really affects all of the small aspects of our life, and that whether it's money, whether it's time, whether it's taking away those common coping skills that we would have. And I mean, for example, individuals who are really outgoing and extroverts having to stay inside a lot and not be able to have that social interaction that they're so used to, produces just a lot of strong emotions, and at times that can be really hard for individuals to manage and to cope.
Something that people might not be thinking a lot about is in recovery, you have to face the isolation of active use and the choices that you have made that got you to that point. And so many people are experiencing recovery right now, or going through recovery right now, are experiencing that isolation all over again. Initially, during their active use, that isolation was due to their own choices and behaviors. And now, due to this virus, due to COVID-19, they're feeling isolated all over again to no fault of their own. So I just want to bring that to mind and keep that in people's forefronts, that this isolation looks different for everybody, and for people who are experiencing addiction and in that recovery process, that isolation is very triggering and could lead to a potential relapse. So reach out to people that you may know, check in with them. That may not be something that people always think about in terms of mental health.
There are a couple of things that I'm really noticing are taking a toll on us. The first one is shame. And the ways that I'm seeing shame play out are a little bit different, but there's definitely been a theme of, the lie of not measuring up or of not being enough. And also the shame that's been coming with seeing familiar old habits coming up again, or old belief patterns, or familiar heavy moods, and just this lie of what's wrong with me, that this is coming up again. Another thing that I'm really seeing in us is just the feeling of powerlessness, which makes sense, right? Like, we have little control over this pandemic. There's a lot of uncertainty going on, and that powerless feeling can lead to a few different things. When we feel powerless, when we believe that we're powerless, that can lead to, increased sadness, increased irritability. You can see people acting in, so more pulling back, wanting to sleep more, taking their feelings out on themselves, or you can see acting out. So that would be, shorter fuses, more outbursts, and that tendency to act feelings out on people around us. So those are things that I'm noticing.
The majority of us are under increased stress, and that's looking like a lot of different things. That's increased financial stress, that's increased emotional stress, that's increased occupational stress, and with that increased stress, we see a strain physically, we see a strain emotionally, relationally, and spiritually. Sometimes when we talk about mental health concerns, we think that's primarily in the mind, that's related to cognition, and that's not necessarily the case. That as humans, we are whole people. We are connected mentally, physically, emotionally, relationally, spiritually. That's how God's designed us. And so that stress that we're experiencing affects us wholly. And for some people that might look a lot like worry and thinking. It might be racing thoughts, having a hard time being settled in their mind. But for a lot of us, it also looks like fatigue, irritability. It might be more tension in your body. It might be a shorter fuse emotionally with those around you. It might be more stress in your relationships. And it can also show up spiritually, a sense of feeling alone or isolated within our community of faith, but also maybe in your relationship with God. So I think when I think about what I see people facing right now is a lot of fatigue and what I would call compassion fatigue, that as the stress is greater, we're feeling that physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, and mentally. Additionally, I would say that the things that we typically use to help cope with those stressors, we have less access to. That, if we think about those things on a week-to-week basis that help us deal with stress, that might be going out with friends, going to a movie, going for a run or a bike ride, going out for drinks, being in a book club, going to the library, going to church. those things that typically we use to help cope with stress, a lot of those things we don't have access to in the same way. And so as the stress grows higher and as the coping skills are less accessible, that's a big gap where we're feeling the strain of things. And so it's just a lot that people are coping with, and we're seeing that come out as increased anxiety, increased depression for some people, but primarily I think we're seeing a lot of fatigue and a lot of relational stress. In addition to stress that people might be feeling, I think there are some other things to be watching out for. I think a sense of powerlessness is something that many of us are experiencing, and that can be weighty, and that powerlessness can lead to increased anxiety symptoms. And so if what you're experiencing goes beyond a sense of stress and fatigue and feeling overwhelmed, if it's a sense of increased powerlessness and anxiety in connection to that, that would be a time to connect with a medical professional or mental health professional to have support. Right now, there's also hopelessness that people are experiencing, a sense of things are always going to be this way. Things will never be different than what they are right now. That's what we would call a sense of hopelessness. And often that sense of hopelessness, in addition to feelings of helplessness, can increase symptoms of depression. And so if beyond that stress that I talked about with feeling overwhelmed and fatigue, if you find yourself experiencing a sense of hopelessness and helplessness, that can precede depressive symptoms or exacerbate depressive symptoms, which can lead to a sense of irritability, questions about self-worth, difficulty sleeping, maybe a change in appetite, as well as potentially suicidal ideation. And if that is something you're experiencing, I would encourage you to reach out to a medical professional or a mental health professional to seek support in those times.
What I'm seeing mostly right now is people that are struggling with a lot of anxiety when it comes to their work, when it comes to their family members, with what to expect. A lot of depression with losing touch with what life used to be like and what life is like now, and how do I even navigate what life is like now and what I see on a daily basis.
COVID-19 has brought a great deal of anxiety and fear to almost everyone. Our lives have been disrupted and changed in so many ways, leaving us without the predictability and consistency of our regular schedules and routines. Our brain seeks some type of balance. It seeks homeostasis between feeling chaos inside and perceiving chaos outside in the world. And when we gain a sense that there is chaos outside and we're feeling distressed inside, it leaves us feeling like we don't know what we have control over, which can result in feelings of fear.
I guess what I'm most worried about is just the chronic stress on everybody, and what that can do to family systems and relationships, all our interpersonal relationships, and then just ourselves, and how quickly we can lose our, sense of balance and peace inside of us during a time like this.
Things to watch for when it comes to others when they are struggling is trying to notice when things are out of character for them, when you notice that they're saying things that they wouldn't normally say, when there's really a loss of hope, when they start to feel like everything is turning to be bad, or that they can't really find a positive in any sort of daily activities.
So when we talk about the stress that people are feeling and that increased stress and lowered coping skills, that gap between means that people are feeling a lot of tension and maybe not necessarily aware of it, maybe not necessarily sure of how to deal with that. And so what I talk about with people about is that it comes out sideways, that comes out in goofy ways, that it might not be a direct sense of I'm feeling stressed or I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling alone, but it might come out in ways that you're unaccustomed to seeing your loved one or your child respond. Maybe stronger emotional reactions. It might be more pulling away, and somebody with whom you're regularly very connected to, you're just not hearing from them as much. as parents, I think probably seeing greater difficulties with sleep and going to sleep, more restlessness, also maybe more energy just on a day-to-day basis, and needing more from their parents in terms of more closeness, more connection, more communication, more structure, children desiring that. Those are some things that I think we can be watching for.
Another thing I think we can be paying attention to, and I think it kind of goes hand in hand with ourselves. As a yoga instructor, I kind of sound like a broken record. I often say, okay, just notice, just notice, just notice. I say it over and over and over again. So one really simple thing, and maybe you want to even do it right now, is just notice the tension that we are holding in our bodies, like in our shoulders, in our jaw, clenching our teeth, our cheeks, the space in between our forehead. Just throughout the day, noticing how we're holding tension in those areas and just allowing it to soften and relax. This is really a really mindful, or a minor mindful technique, but it's almost like you let it relax, and then you're like, oh, well, that's better. So maybe just reminding yourself to try to do that throughout the day, whenever it might be, getting in your car, trying to do second grade math. I don't know. But it's really simple, and I think it can be really effective.
So our brain, to simplify it, Dr. Dan Siegel came up with this model of your brain. You can use your hand. It's for a mini model of it. So you take your hand like a mitten. And if you can't tell already, I do work with really young kids. So you take your hand like a mitten, you put your thumb in like this, and then you flip down your fingers like that, and then this is a mini version of your brain, okay? And so we simplify it and say there are two main parts to the brain. There's the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain. Okay, in our downstairs brain, it's in charge of our feelings. It helps us survive when we're stressed or we might be feeling attacked. Some people call it the reptilian brain. It's kind of like if a bear were to walk in this room, that's the part of my brain that would save me. Okay, and the top part of your brain is called the upstairs brain. So this would be like your prefrontal cortex, be like right here in your head. And this is our thinking brain. So feeling brain, thinking brain. And this part, upstairs brain, helps us to problem solve, think through things. It helps us to have empathy. It helps us to slow down and make good decisions. When our brain is like this, we are our best selves. We're calm, we're kind, we interact with the world in a way that's appropriate. We follow the rules usually. But what happens is when we get stressed, so when we get too mad, too sad, too disappointed, what happens is we flip our lid, and I make this noise with kids. They like to do that. And so when we're like this, our upstairs brain isn't on, okay? And all we can use is our downstairs brain. So we're just going off our feelings. We're just going off our instincts, our reptilian brain, our downstairs brain. And so, I mean, you can imagine that's when most of us make our poor choices. Our choices that hurt other people, and our choices that aren't good for ourselves is when we're in our downstairs brain. So the best thing we can do anytime, and especially right now when we have so much stress, is to try to use strategies to get our upstairs brain to stay on, okay? So that we're calm and kind and we feel like our best selves. And then I think as parents, if we can identify when our kids' lids are flipped or when our lids are flipped, then we can be really helpful in the moment, because right now, if our kids' brain is like this, they're not rational. They're not thinking things through. We might say, what were you thinking? They weren't. They can't. Our speech function isn't even up here. So as grown-ups, we like want kids to explain to us what's going on. Maybe they can't yet until they're regulated, until they calm down and their brain's like back like this, so you can give time. So the best things you can do is identify when we're in our upstairs brain and it's lit up and we're calm, and when we're not. And if you can do that, then you can approach the situation accordingly. So if my son's screaming, and I'm not gonna go to him and try to solve the problem right away. I'm gonna wait, I'm gonna say, oh, I think your lid's flipped, right? And sometimes he'll nod, and sometimes he'll, growl at me or something. But yep, oh, that's a good indicator, his lid is flipped. And so what I need to do in that moment is anything I can to help calm. Hugs, whatever works for your child or whatever works for you. We can do this for us because you know what, as parents, a lot of time flipping lids is magnetic. So we flip our lids, and then maybe our child's will, or maybe our child flips their lid, and then we flip ours. It's the hardest thing in the world when someone's lid is flipped to still keep yours on. Stay calm, take deep breaths. It's okay to take space and time. It's okay to say, we're gonna solve that problem later. Right now, we're just gonna take a second to calm down. So the reason why I talk about this during the COVID-19 pandemic is just because I think it applies to every single second of our day, because most of us are living like this, maybe with our lid cracked off at this time because of this time. Our window of tolerance from here to here is smaller because of all the stress that we have just going on in the world and in our lives from the pandemic.
If there was one thing that I would want the church to know about mental health, it's that nothing excludes you from God's table. And I'm thankful that I have that perspective, that we as a church get to have that perspective. I think it helps make us stronger. But just with that, there is no feeling, there is no doubt that God is disgusted by, and isn't willing to enter into with you, from a perspective of empathy and redemption. And I also just want to say that it's possible to hold the joy of the Lord and sadness for our circumstances at the same time. It's uncomfortable and it's not always easy, but it's possible. It's possible to have hope in the Lord and in where our story is going while having uncertainty for the next week, uncertainty over the next 6 months. It's possible to hold both. And again, not comfortable and not easy, but possible.
So this question about what I would like to tell the church just about mental health, there's so many different ways that people can go with this question. And the biggest thing that really stood out to me, that if I can only say one thing, is that we get this incredible privilege to follow suit, to really look at Jesus's example of how he responds to mental health. And just in my personal relationship with God and with my mental health issues, and also just in my experience of studying the Word, it's incredible just to see how every single time someone approaches him with the reality of where they're at, he never responds with shame or guilt or judgment. It is always, always love, compassion, and just this intense freedom. This freedom to be completely yourself, be real with where you're at, and also the freedom to sit in that. And he has this incredible compassion and love to sit with us in that, but also to walk through and out of that. And as his believers, as his children, we also are equipped for that. And we get the privilege of following his guidance in how he has responded to mental health, and just the reality of where people are at when they're not okay, because not being okay is okay. And it's just very cool as children of God that we have this incredible source, ever-flowing source, and the capability to have all this love and compassion to respond to individuals who are struggling with mental illness. And it's just very cool that Jesus honestly is the biggest advocate for mental health, and sometimes that's missed within the church.
I'm so thankful to be a part of a church that sees everyone as a whole, that sees mental health as being an important component, just like our spiritual health and our physical health. We are whole beings and we are designed that way. And the Bible tells us we're designed in God's image. If we're designed in God's image, then He wants for us to consider our mental state and our emotional state just as much as we consider our spiritual state and our physical state. Mental health is not something to be afraid of or to be ashamed of or to hide away. The Bible gives us example after example after example of individuals who struggled. They struggled with their thoughts, they struggled with their emotions, they struggled to make sense of situations that seemed out of control. And yet, God didn't leave them. God didn't not use them. He sought them out in the midst of their struggles. I think that's one of the things I find absolutely the most beautiful part of scriptures, is that God didn't wait for them to figure it out. God met His people in the yuck. He met them in the confusion, in the anger, in the sadness, in the fear, and said, I will walk with you where you're at. So it isn't like we have to get ourselves figured out and get ourselves a certain way for God to use us. I think it's an opportunity for Him to prove Himself to us of how big He really is and how much He really does love us no matter what condition we're in.
And what I would tell others when they're struggling like that is that there are people out there that are looking to help them, that God hasn't lost sight of them, that they are not alone, that there are people that want to hear what they have to say and want to listen, and that you aren't being a burden, and that we are here to help.
Be graceful with yourself and be graceful with each other. This is a time where we need to validate and understand that things look different, that things are not the same.
Sometimes there's a narrative that if we had more faith, or if we had more trust, or if we prayed more, if we read scripture more, if we leaned on the faith community more, that mental health concerns would go away. And I don't think that's true. I think that pain and suffering, whether that's cognitive distress, physical distress, emotional distress, relational distress, I think that's all a part of what it means to be human. That suffering is a reality of our human experience, and instead of it being a time to do more or try harder, that those moments of pain and suffering are a moment to seek connection, that those pain points, those times that we experience pain, suffering, hardship, are an opportunity to connect with those around us and also to connect with God. That I think that, just theologically, those are moments of wrestling that point us to God, that point us to something outside of ourselves, whether that is a relationship that can offer support and connection, a friendship, a faith community, a family relationship, but ultimately that points us to the bigger relationship that we are meant to be wired and connected to our Creator, the one who orchestrated all of those things within ourselves. And so I think I would say that church, it's not a time to overcome anything, but it's a time to connect and a time to seek support, and to know that in that place of pain, that's where we can find actually greater healing and greater connection to ourselves and to one another, and ultimately to God.
No judgment, no shame. It's part of all of us, not just some of us. Good mental health is for all of us. And that we want to create systems and churches that normalize good mental health, that normalize going to a counselor when you need it or when you want to improve a goal. something me and my husband do. A lot of our really close relationships at Invitation 605, they're not afraid to talk about how they've been feeling. They're not afraid to maybe go to a counselor or something like that. I think the best thing we can do is just normalize good mental health and well-being.
There is no shame in getting support, getting help, whether it's for the first time or you've been getting support throughout your life. It's just, there's no shame in it. And in addition to that, I think we're just so fortunate to have so many resources through the church, through the community, through private entities. There's so much out there, and getting help is not a one-size-fits-all, right? That's why one of the reasons I love yoga is because it's just one more thing that might be what you need to get by or to feel better. So just knowing that what may have helped your neighbor might not be the right help for you, and that's okay. So knowing that there's just no shame in getting help, and knowing that there is a variety of resources out there for you and your individual needs. There are people out there to provide that protected space for whatever it is you're carrying. So we are here for you, and please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything that we can do to help you or your families.
Number one is that you are not alone. And I don't mean that in a way to make it small of like, well, we're all struggling. But what I mean is there are people who are willing to answer your call or text. There are even services that are available for you if you think that might be a route to take. We are people who are created for community. We are not meant to heal in isolation or loneliness. This pandemic makes that even more challenging. That's one of the things I hate about it. But if you are feeling lonely, if you are feeling like I'm in a funk, or you know what, I am angrier lately, I would encourage you to call a safe, solid person and help them help you bear that burden, because we're meant to do it together. We're meant to help. We're meant to heal with one another.
Anyone who is struggling with mental health at this point in time, if you could take just one thing away, you're not alone. And also, it's so incredibly understandable that this time can be stressful and anxiety provoking and really leave you wondering, like, what's next? What can I do, and not have a lot of guidance, because it can be difficult to really navigate that and figure that out. So one, you're not alone. And two, there are so many resources and so many people who would gladly and happily and feel extremely honored in order to partner with you throughout this process and to walk with you through this, because going through everything in life can be terrifying if you're doing it alone. And I just want you to know that you don't have to.
If you are someone that is struggling right now, please know that you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to go through this by yourself. No matter how messed up you are, or how messed up people have told you you are, God loves you exactly where you're at. He knows. He's right there with you, but he doesn't want to leave you there. He wants to connect you to other people who can walk with you. Now, maybe you've tried to reach out in the past, and I'm sorry if you have not had a good experience. I'm sorry if you have been judged or dismissed or not accepted because of your mental state or your emotional state. But I don't believe that's who God is. I believe that God sees us, He knows us, and He loves us right where we are. And it's when we can reach out to others, when we can tap someone on the shoulder and say, I need some help with this, That's when God really gets to use his people. He gets to use his body. He gets to use the church. He gets to walk alongside of us in human form. And he gets to say, you're not alone in this. Yes, God is right there with us, but I also believe he wants to bring people alongside us to tap us on the shoulder and remind us of that. Remind us that when we're overwhelmed by a pandemic, and our anxiety is out of control, or we feel hopeless because we can't see perhaps how our business or our family or our finances can survive. God's right there with you, but you also don't have to do it alone.
Thanks so much for joining us today. But before we leave, we didn't want to just drop this video and then say see you next week. Our team worked together to put a bunch of resources together. So there's a document that we've put together that has resources as you move forward after this day. And so go to the link in the comments to a Google Drive document that we put together, just all different kinds of resources. So it's very possible that today has brought up some stuff for you or for someone that you care about, and maybe you've been thinking about for a long time reaching out for help. And so we have resources that we can put in your hands to do just that. And so it is our hope that you would make use of those resources as you move forward. Thanks so much for being a part of this conversation today, and know this is going to be something that we're going to continue to talk about. This is not the end. This is not a checklist kind of thing where now we've talked about it and now we're done. This is the beginning of a conversation as we lean on God to bring heaven on earth in these days. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.